This is Influence by Robert Caldini. My name's David, and this is going to be my full and complete review. The reason why I ended up picking up this book was I was interested in learning a little bit more about sales, and man, this book really blew me out of the water. Robert Caldini identifies 7 principles in sales that fundamentally kind of flip human psychology. In fact, this book starts out in a really slow manner talking about turkeys. Yes, that's right, turkeys the bird. In particular, this book talks about mother turkeys, and how mother turkeys, like many other animals in nature, are very loving bringing up their chicks. But what is odd about the mother turkey is she will only nurture her chicks if they make this cheep cheep noise. If the chick does not say cheep cheep, that chick would potentially die because the mother would neglect that chick, very sadly. But what is even more bizarre is if something like an inanimate object would make the cheep cheep noise, that mother turkey would start nursing it as if it was its own chick. In fact, to the point the mother turkey would even nurse something like a predator if it starts making the cheep cheep noise. So instead of being afraid of it, it would actually start nursing it. Robert Caldini then goes on to explain that, much like the mother turkey, human beings can be manipulated to do certain actions or behaviors that are odd, unusual, or maybe potentially downright not in our favor, given some sort of trigger being set off. In this book, Influence, Robert Caldini identifies 7 principles of influence, which, much like the chirp chirp noise, will actually trigger human beings to make a sales decision. While reading this book, I identified not only one of the principles which worked on me in the past, where I actually had a use case where this particular person had influenced me in a certain way to make a sale on a either product or service that I had, but in fact, all 7 of these principles I was subjected to. I could account at least one occasion where one of these principles actually worked on me. So this is not only an offensive strategy, this is a defensive strategy as well. But right now, I will be going over those 7 sales principles just so you can be aware of them. But I do recommend reading this book because the way they go over these different sales principles and they explain certain use cases and different groups that have used them in the past, it's kind of cool to know how effective they are and how that you can use them. The first principle of influence is going to be reciprocation, where one individual will give a gift to another individual, and then that individual is going to want to reciprocate and then give a gift back to the other individual, oftentimes of greater value than the initial gift that they were given. In fact, the first gift given to that other individual could be so small and insignificant that other individual will still feel like they have to reciprocate and give something back to that particular individual. And this makes sense from a historic standpoint because human beings over time have established this system of value in trade and commerce, and that is kind of important in helping us advance as a society. So this is something built into kind of our DNA and into our our psyche and our mindset. And so it is kind of sad to see it kind of manipulated in this kind of way where a salesperson might give you something of incredibly small, intangible value, then he'll try to upsell you on something 4, 5, 6 times the value sometimes, or any type of multiple as possible. In the book, they would talk about a religious group which would give out flowers, and in return, they would receive monetary donations to their organization. In fact, these flowers were so of little value the person receiving the flowers would often just throw them away in the trash can just to get rid of them and just discard them, that they didn't even want the gift that they first received to begin with. And then that religious group would go take those flowers back out of the trash, give them to another person in hopes that they might get another donation to their organization, and then so on and so forth. The next of the 7 principles is going to be commitment and consistency. People like to stand by what they've kind of already agreed to. And where this comes in is kind of like the lowball offer example, where a salesperson might set up a deal with you, and then down the road they might change that deal just a little bit so it's more favorable to the seller, and then the person's going to still end up going with it because they've already kind of agreed to that previous deal. Another thing this is also referred to is the foot in the door method, where a person first becomes a customer with some sort of sweet offering, and then all of a sudden then you're more able to sell to them in the future because they've already committed something in the past, and they're more likely to commit something therefore in the future. The next principle is going to be social proof. And probably the best example of this is brands like Supreme or Apple, where you have these huge lines at the door people waiting to get in, or Black Friday kind of sales. We have all these people just waiting, right? And everybody's like really anxious to buy. And the fact that they're actually competing against other buyers is kind of crazy. But when you think about it, there's a good example in the nature world where you have tuna, right? And the way they catch them out in like places like Japan and different places like that, where they catch some of these tuna, is they'll actually set it so it looks like they're baiting them a little bit, and they'll actually throw out a little bit of bait, and then they'll spray hoses on the water, and these fish become so anxious to bite on something that might be food just because they're competing against these other fish around them that are exactly like them, that they'll bite on hooks, like just raw metal hooks. They're willing to bite those, and then these guys are actually like bringing them into the boat. It's absolutely crazy. This thing that happens in nature also happens in the human world as well. We've all seen the images on Black Friday of people getting punched in the face for a flat screen TV, absolute chaos that ensues. Yeah, it's kind of crazy how human behavior can go if we're competing against one another, even if it's something that might not be a favorable deal to us. The next principle is going to be liking. And where this comes into play is like physical attraction, or it could be something where you're either matching their body language, or you're finding similarities that you might have with that particular customer, and you're kind of matching them so that you become more like them, and then they're more apt to reciprocate like you because they feel like you're in essentially their tribe, if you will. Additionally, people also like people that work together to achieve a common goal. The next principle is going to be authority. And we know with all the gurus and everything out there today, this one's kind of fun and interesting because there's a particular story in here where it talks about a nurse administering like an eardrop into somebody's butt because of a grammatical error that a doctor actually put on a note. I feel like it's kind of odd as a society. We overstep when somebody like, a president or a high senior ranking person, especially when they're in the room. It's one thing to see them on the TV, but when the president's in the room, you kind of feel that presence, and it's like very strong and controlling. And honestly, you'll take almost anything from somebody like that level of a person for granted, and it's really powerful to see something as extreme as that. But like even like somebody like a basic celebrity, like people just getting famous off TikTok these days, like these people were absolutely nobody, and then they found a following, and now all of a sudden they're experts and they're demanding lots of money for their time, effort, and explanations, which oftentimes really aren't even that good at face value. The next principle is going to be scarcity, and this might be an offer that's only going to be available for a short period of time, or perhaps a very small production run in order to kind of increase demand and excitement for that particular object, making those huge lines at the Apple store, right? And in the book, it also mentions that a lot of times people are more afraid of that offer being taken away than actually being worthwhile in the first place. Another way to show scarcity is potentially like the information in particular might only be available for a certain amount of time. I know I've seen that a lot lately with these different courses that I've been enrolling in here lately, admittedly. The last principle I'm going to give you is the us versus them, or the unity principle, right? This is where somebody might build up a team like Team Apple or Team Android. Those people have equally strong feelings about one another, and they feel united in this weird kind of way that is even hard to socially explain, even though, hey, both these tribes are absolutely taking our money hand over fist with these $1,000 cell phones that they roll out every year that really are just about the same. But we still feel this way whenever we're talking about like a professional sports team or a college team, which, by the way, if you went to college, they probably took your hard-earned money as well too. However, we feel very strongly about them when they win the national championship. There's kind of a differentiation when people talk about when we win something or when they lose something. In fact, we kind of shun them and we kind of feel ashamed and embarrassed of them. And in fact, they talk about this a little bit in the book, where the Saints fans were actually wearing bags over their heads, where it was kind of like they felt like they were a part of that team. And it meant something kind of towards their identity, even, if you will. But regardless, there are tons of sport brand merchandise out there every day, and it's almost ubiquitous at this point. It's everywhere. Those are the 7 principles of influence. I do want to say Robert Caldini also explains that this could work on your kids. So for those of you with children that are trying to influence them to make good decisions, this is a great book for you guys as well. The way this book affected me is I really do feel like these are going to be my 7 sales fundamentals, which I'm going to use from here to every sale that I ever make for the rest of my life, more or less. These are the basic and core fundamentals like the core fundamentals of physics or thermodynamics or something like that. Obviously I have an engineering background, so I have a kind of bias in that. But these are actual real fundamental sales rules which you can apply today, and you can use them because they're grounded in reality and grounded in like science principles and have been tested and actually kind of proven throughout his books with his different examples that he gives. That's what I really like about this. It gives you the backbone, and it doesn't give you like the BS kind of talk that, you know, is all floating around out there today. As long as you have these basic fundamentals, you can kind of weed out the good sales ideas and the bad ones, I think. So that's why I really like this book. Thank you again, Robert Caldini.